The first person that we're going to hear from today is, of course, the ABC's Annabelle Crabb. She's their chief political writer and one of Australia's most popular political journalists and commentators. And she's got almost 60,000 followers, so I think she knows a little bit about Twitter. Let's make her very welcome.
I just wanted to start by talking about the moment that I really kind of fell in love with Twitter as a journalist. I mean, we saw each other casually for quite a while, no real commitment on either side. And the moment was in the 2010 election campaign when I was driving in a taxi over the Anzac Bridge. And you know that big billboard that's over all those old silos there? I mean, it's the largest billboard in Sydney, I think. And the ALP had taken it out with this colossal kind of fear ad with this giant picture of Tony Abbott's mug and then some probing questions about his suitability to be a Prime Minister. And I thought, God, I wonder how much that costs to hire. And so I thought, maybe I'll just ask Twitter. And by the time I'd got to the other end of the bridge, some excellent advertising nerd who happened to be up, at that hour, came back to me by direct message, because they didn't want to reply publicly, with an estimate of how much it would have cost the ALP to hire that billboard. And that was a moment where I kind of started to realise the potential of this platform. Because I think with journalism, and no one disputes that journalism and the business of journalism and the practice of journalism has undergone a kind of seismic rearrangement in the last decade. But when you remember what it's all about, it's about collecting information on one hand and then disseminating it on the other. And what's happened to, I think, media in the last decade is that we've been entirely deregulated on both of those fronts. Social media has changed all that. The 24-hour news cycle has changed all that. 24-hour news networks have changed all that. Anyone can watch a press conference now. Anyone can read press releases and documentation online. Anyone can have access to the budget papers, obviously after the 7 o'clock knockoff. And so all of that stuff is deregulated, and the dissemination of information is deregulated too. It used to be that having the clanking apparatus of a big old printing press was a distinct market advantage, and we're getting to the point, I think, where you could start to look at some of that infrastructure as an actual disadvantage. Media has now become lighter, more portable, and easier for anyone to do. So we're just facing this incredible deregulation or stripping away of structural protections that we enjoyed previously. If we're really honest about what we do, and I think all of these structural changes are forcing us to be very honest about what journalists do. We've always been collators of information. Now you have such easy access to people through social media. You're collating information that comes from your audience too, and that's incredibly helpful, because if we are honest with ourselves, often people in our audience know more about what we're writing about than we do. Your occupation as a journalist is often to be a sort of, sharp-minded ignoramus, and collate information really quickly together. And I think the opportunity to pick people's brains through interactive social media is just one of the most exciting things about those platforms. There are downsides, of course, and one thing that I think a lot of journalists find difficult to get used to on social media is that, the conveying of information now isn't just a one-way thing. It's kind of, you post your story and then you don't go to the pub, or you may go to the pub anyway, but you get instant reviews on how rubbish this piece of crap you've just written is, or, how stupid your hair looks. Lots of ladies in the media will be familiar with that one. And so you get this sort of incredibly brutal instant assessment, and that is kind of difficult to take sometimes, but I feel really strongly about that it's something that journalists have been doing to subjects for many years, giving them free character assessments. So if we can't take it ourselves, then that's pretty pathetic, I think.
The second person that we'll be hearing from is Stephen Brook.
When we were discussing earlier what sort of topics we might like to look at, one of the suggested ideas was, could this platform be a medium for serious journalism, which was something that I decided to dismiss out of hand. There's a school of thought in America that Twitter is not even a news service, it's just a news source. And like Google News, it's all completely dependent on what people put into it. But then I had a change of heart because I was looking around and I came across the example of Brian Stelter, who is the media writer for the New York Times and actually switched from the blogosphere to print. He was called away on assignment to go and track Hurricane Irene last year through North Carolina. And he did this both by writing conventional stories that appeared on the New York Times website and in print, but also by providing a live update via Twitter. So if you like, he live tweeted the hurricane as it made its progress through North Carolina. Taken in isolation, the tweets were quite mundane. You know, tiles have been ripped from a roof here, or the siding has peeled off a building there, or my poncho has been ripped to pieces. But I think that for a lot of people following him that day, it added up into a compelling narrative. And for a lot of people, their experience of what happened in that weather event came via the little bits and pieces that he wrote about continuously rather than a conventional news report. I also came up with a slightly provocative idea that Twitter could be the new CB radio, i.e. something that was hugely popular for a short time but became faddish and then died away. And I think we've got to remind ourselves that Twitter is only 6 years old. Predicting its future is somewhat difficult. I would say that what is apparent now, and I think will always be the case throughout our lifetimes, is that Facebook is much more popular. And because of that popularity, we think there's about 140 million active users worldwide using Twitter. Facebook has something like 800 million. For news platforms and media organizations, Facebook is often far more useful in directing traffic to your website. All the metrics show that Facebook users are more engaged, they're spending longer on that platform than Twitter, they're bringing more audiences into websites. Other limitations I wanted to run through briefly was the Guardian did a data blog on Twitter users and found that most UK journalists as a group were following other UK users. And I think that's a very important issue to raise, how much of Twitter is circular. We think that it's an amazing resource that we're getting the world's opinion to us, but often I think it's quite a distorted opinion because the types of people that are on Twitter are people in this room, media professionals, they're inside the digital bubble, if you like. And I wanted to end just by talking about those people who aren't on Twitter. It looks like Australia, the number of people with no home computer, 21%. Number of people not on broadband, 25%. The number of people who are online in Australia who don't have a smartphone is more than half. And households without a tablet of any form, 80%. So over the next 5 years, as Twitter becomes increasingly popular and mainstream media continues to struggle, my fear is that people are going to get left behind. And I think as journalists we need to be very conscious of that. There are people who will never be using these kind of platforms. They're going to be old people. They're going to be very young people. They're going to be poor people. They're going to be people who live in remote and regional areas. And they still deserve quality journalism. And as newspaper circulation dwindles and distribution areas are cut, I think we've got to be very careful that they don't get left behind. Thank you very much.
I'd like to invite First Dog on the Moon to come and have a chat to us. He's a professional satirist for Crikey. And with 15,000 followers plus, it's safe to say that he's a Twitter it girl. Come on stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Magdalena. My chosen topic is really how great it is that Twitter provides us, non-journalists, the consumers, with not just another channel, but really a far more effective channel to hang shit on journalists, which I think is something that certainly in the little digital bubble that I spend my time in with Stephen and Annabelle and Magdalena it's almost a contact sport. I use Twitter all the time as part of my work. So again, I think that would make me, like everyone else in this room, an expert. I use journalism every day because I need to know what I'm going to do my cartoons about. Why, however, do we still care about talking about Twitter? To me, if from inside the media bubble, the digital bubble, it seems ubiquitous, it's everywhere. Wouldn't this be the same as having a panel on email and journalism or the telephone and journalism? Although clearly it might help some journalists to pick up the phone and call people occasionally, although we do see them chasing up stories on Twitter. Two main things I enjoy about the intersection of journalism and Twitter. I do my research, and where do I go when I go? I go to Twitter and I talk to or read or follow people like Annabelle, Mark Colvin. I follow non-journalists, people like Ben HR and Jason AW. I get all my weather from Magdalena, of course. And I'm not just reading paid journalism when I follow the links that they provide me with. I'm reading bloggers. I'm reading all sorts of things that no longer fall into the category of journalism, and lots of pictures of cats. On Twitter, all content is equal. It's just that some content is more equal than others. So the thing that is in fact the most important thing to me about the intersection between Twitter and journalism is that I trust people, some of whom are journalists, like I said, to create my experience of the internet. Google would like to do that, but I don't want them to do it. I let people on Twitter choose the journalism I read instead. Now, I'm still going to The Age or The Fin, or to read cut and paste in the Australian, but I no longer automatically assume that those publications will have what I want. And who really would want to be a journalist on Twitter? It's an excellent channel, as I said, for expressing anger in a far more deliberate and nuanced way than writing a letter to the editor or even leaving comments on a story online. You can get a lot of bile into 140 characters. So, as a consumer, it's so satisfying engaging with the journalist who wrote the story you just read. You can even see them as they use Twitter to source the stories rather than going out into the world. And you can simply heap abuse on them in real time. You can see journalists in the act of making a call to a politician or someone on Twitter and then getting all shirty that they're not getting the answers they want, and then they have a fight. I mean, that's glorious. And a word of advice on that is get off the internet, because you look like a dickhead. You both look like dickheads if you're going to have one of those kind of fights. I drew a cartoon about that here. You see, here's us, the consumer, watching the fight with the popcorn, and here's the journalist and the politician. All right. Because we can now interact directly with journalists, we can see them relating to each other, we can see what they're really like, we can really get a sense of who they are, and we realise that we were pretty much right to hate them all along. They really are terrible people.